Dawn crept over the western Pacific on August 6, 1945, like any other summer morning. The sky above Hiroshima was clear, the air warm, the city already waking to the hum of bicycles, streetcars, and schoolchildren hurrying along narrow streets. Bakeries fired their morning ovens. Soldiers returned from night watch. Mothers prepared breakfast. There was no warning, no wailing siren, no formation of bombers overhead, no indication whatsoever that the next 10 seconds would sever human history into a before and an after. At exactly 8:15 a.m., a blinding, implausible flash tore open the sky brighter than the sun itself. Shadows of people were burned into stone. A firestorm of silent, invisible death rolled outward, lifting the city into the air before slamming it back down as ash. 3 days later, another sunburst would rise over Nagasaki. These were not simply military events. They were moments that altered the human species, in science, in warfare, in ethics, in fear, in power, and in possibility. This is the story of how the atomic age began, how 2 cities were consumed by firelight, and how the world confronted a weapon capable of ending civilization itself forever. By the summer of 1945, World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, was staggering toward its brutal end. In Europe, Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. The continent lay in ruins. But in the Pacific, the Japanese Empire still fought with ferocious resolve. American planners feared that invading Japan would be catastrophic. The Battle of Okinawa alone, fought only months earlier, cost over 12,000 American lives and more than 100,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians. Military estimates predicted that a full-scale invasion of the Japanese home islands, codenamed Operation Downfall, might result in hundreds of thousands of American casualties and millions of Japanese deaths. Yet something else had been brewing in the deserts of New Mexico, a scientific gamble beyond imagination. The Manhattan Project was the largest secret operation in history. More than 130,000 workers, spread across 30 sites, from Tennessee to Washington state, working under absolute secrecy. Many had no idea what they were building. Some believed they were manufacturing parts for aircraft engines. Others assumed it was chemical research. Only a small circle of physicists, Oppenheim, Fermi, Szilard, Teller, and a handful more understood the truth. They were creating a weapon whose destructive potential had no limits. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., their creation roared to life. In the stillness of the Jornada del Muerto desert, the world's first nuclear device exploded into a towering, mushroom-shaped inferno. Observers miles away felt a heat like an open furnace. The shockwave nearly knocks them off their feet. J. Robert Oppenheimer later recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The Trinity blast proved the unimaginable was now possible. The question was, would the United States use it? Several Japanese cities had been shortlisted as potential targets. Hiroshima rose to the top, not simply because of its military value, but because it was untouched by major bombing. It was, in the cold logic of military science, a pristine laboratory. Hiroshima was home to 350,000 people, a city of wooden houses, narrow streets, streetcars, schools, factories, a thriving port, a military headquarters, and thousands of civilians who believed incorrectly that Hiroshima had been spared because it was not important. They did not know they were being preserved for a demonstration. The flight of the Enola Gay in the early hours of August 6th, a B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, lifted off from Tinian Island. Inside its bomb bay rested a single device, carefully wrapped in protective harnesses. Codename, Little Boy. It was not the most sophisticated bomb the U.S. had built, but it did not need to be. It worked through uranium-235, a rare and extraordinarily expensive isotope. So expensive, in fact, that the Hiroshima bomb used nearly the entire global supply. On board, crew members wrote in their logs. One of them, Theodore Dutch Van Kirk, said later, "We were told it would end the war. That was enough for us." But none of us understood what it would really do. The people of Hiroshima began their morning like any other. A 10-year-old schoolgirl named Takako Masuda swept the sidewalk in front of her house. A young doctor, Terafumi Sasaki, hurried down a hallway in the Red Cross hospital. A soldier, fresh from breakfast, walked toward his barracks. Above them, at 31,000 feet, Bombardier Thomas Farabee peered into his sight and released the weapon. The flash for 43 seconds. Little Boy fell silently toward the city. Then, the universe changed. A sphere of light erupted with a temperature hotter than the surface of the sun. Buildings vaporized. Steel melted. Human bodies simply disappeared. Those not instantly killed were thrown across rooms, buried under collapsing houses, or burned by a windstorm of fire moving faster than a hurricane. Some victims were so close to the blast, their shadows were carved into stone, frozen reminders of the instant life became death. One survivor recalled, "A white flash, then darkness. When I woke, the world had become hell. The cloud rose 10 miles high. Beneath it, Hiroshima dissolved into flame." Of the 76,000 buildings in the city, over 70% were destroyed instantly. Tens of thousands died in the first seconds. By nightfall, the fires had consumed many of the rest. Yet the worst was still unseen. Atomic bombs kill in ways conventional weapons cannot. Beyond the blast and the fire came something invisible: gamma radiation. People who appeared uninjured collapsed hours later. Hair fell out in clumps. Fever spiked. Skin peeled away in sheets. Doctors, overwhelmed and horrified, watched as patients died from a force no one fully understood. Dr. Sasaki, one of the few physicians left alive, worked for days without sleep. He later said, "I treated wounds unlike anything I had ever imagined." Every surface of the hospital was covered with dying people. This was the beginning of radiation sickness, a phenomenon nearly unknown before Hiroshima. News trickled into Tokyo slowly. At first, government officials assumed Hiroshima had been hit by a conventional bombing raid. Reports of a new type of bomb were dismissed as American propaganda. But as reconnaissance aircraft returned, describing total annihilation, the truth became undeniable. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki convened the Supreme War Council. Some leaders insisted on continuing the war. Others urged surrender. The meeting ended without a decision. Meanwhile, thousands remained trapped under rubble in Hiroshima, calling for help that never came. The world barely had time to absorb Hiroshima before the next blow fell. On August 9th, another B-29 boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, took off carrying Fat Man, a more advanced plutonium-based implosion bomb. Nagasaki was not the original target. The city of Kokura was. But cloud cover and smoke obscured the drop zone. After 3 failed bombing runs, Sweeney made a fateful decision: divert to the secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., Fat Man detonated in the Urakami Valley. The geography of Nagasaki, with its hills and ridges, prevented total destruction on the scale of Hiroshima, but the bomb was significantly more powerful. A giant orange fireball rose above the city, sending shockwaves through shipyards, neighborhoods, churches, and schools. The Urakami Cathedral, once the largest Christian structure in East Asia, vanished in an instant. Thousands died instantly. Thousands more died in the weeks that followed. A Nagasaki schoolgirl, Sachiko Yasui, later wrote, "The sun had fallen. The world had ended. We did not know why." The Japanese leadership met again on August 9th, hours after Nagasaki burned. Once again, the War Council was deadlocked. The military wanted to fight on. Civilian leaders knew Japan could not survive another atomic blast. At 2 a.m. on August 10th, Emperor Hirohito broke the tie. The first time in history, a Japanese emperor intervened directly in government decision-making. Japan would surrender. On August 15th, Hirohito addressed the nation by radio, the first time his people had ever heard his voice. He said, "The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Should we continue to fight, it would lead to the extinction of the Japanese nation." World War II was over. The survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki came to be known as Hibakusha bomb-affected people. They suffered lifelong consequences: cancers, chronic illnesses, genetic fears, societal stigma. Many were treated as outcasts, seen as damaged or contagious. Yet they also became powerful voices for peace. Hibakusha like Setsuko Thurlow, Sunao Sugoi, and Shintaro Hida spent decades traveling the world, sharing their stories. Many speaking publicly about the bomb for the first time in their old age. Their testimonies became the moral backbone of the global anti-nuclear movement. One survivor said, "I lived while others burned, so I must speak for those who cannot." Many Manhattan Project scientists had believed the bomb would be used only to scare Nazi Germany, or that it would never need to be used at all. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, some felt overwhelming guilt. Physicist Leo Szilard, who had first conceived of a nuclear chain reaction, wrote, "We had created a weapon that could destroy humanity. Now we had used it." Others, including Oppenheimer, pushed for international controls on nuclear arms. But the genie was already out of the bottle. In 1949, The Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb. The nuclear arms race began. Humanity now lived under a shadow, a weapon with the power to erase civilization in an afternoon. Historians continue to debate whether the atomic bombings were justified. 2. Major perspectives dominate. Argument 1. The bomb saved lives. Supporters argue. The Japanese government refused unconditional surrender. An invasion would have killed millions. The bomb forced a swift end to the war. Posts and civilians across Asia were spared continued suffering. President Truman later said, "I never lost a night's sleep over my decision." Critics argue. Japan was already near collapse. A demonstration bomb could have been used instead. Targeting civilians was morally indefensible. The bombings were partly a show of power aimed at the Soviet Union. General Dwight Eisenhower later wrote, "Japan was already defeated. It wasn't necessary to hit them with that awful thing." There is no universal answer, only the echoes of 2 days that forever changed human possibility. Here are several striking historical truths, often forgotten or overlooked. A Japanese POW camp in Hiroshima held American airmen, all of whom were killed instantly by the bomb dropped by their own country. The pilot of the Enola Gay, Paul Tibbets, never expressed regret, but he instructed his family not to hold a funeral, fearing protests. Radioactive black rain fell miles outside the city, contaminating water supplies and crops. The Hiroshima bomb failed to detonate properly. It was 90% inefficient, meaning less than 2% of its uranium actually exploded, yet the city was annihilated. The bomb over Nagasaki missed its target by nearly 2 miles, an error that spared tens of thousands of additional lives. Hiroshima's atomic dome, now a peace memorial, was one of the few buildings left standing because the blast came almost directly above it. Each of these details underscores the frightening unpredictability of nuclear weapons. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki did more than end a war. They created a new world, a world where nations could destroy each other in minutes. A world where diplomacy became a high-stakes balancing act. A world where scientists grappled with the consequences of their genius. A world where survival depended on restraint. In the decades that followed, treaties were negotiated, missiles were built, crises came and went from the Cuban Missile Crisis to the Cold War arms race. Yet despite everything humanity has learned, over 12,000 nuclear weapons still exist today. The shadow cast in 1945 has never truly left us. The morning of August 6th began with ordinary people doing ordinary things. Mothers preparing food. Students heading to school. Workers opening shops. Priests conducting mass. Doctors beginning their rounds. By 8:16 a.m., they were gone. In Nagasaki, 3 days later, the story repeated. The atomic bombings were more than military actions. They were a warning, a glimpse into a future we must avoid at all costs. A reminder that humanity possesses the means to end itself, not through hatred or ambition, but through miscalculation, fear, or pride. Yet from the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki rose not only grief, but determination, a promise by survivors that no other city should ever endure the same fate. Their message echoes across decades. No more Hiroshimas. No more Nagasakis. The day the world changed can never be undone, but what we choose to do with its memory that remains in our hands. And that concludes our journey into this extraordinary moment in history. If you enjoyed exploring the past with me, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next deep dive. Now it's your turn. What historical event should we uncover next? Share your ideas in the comments below, and your suggestion might be featured in a future video. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep seeking the stories that shaped our world.